A special good night to all of our viewers tonight, and welcome again to another edition of political discussion here on Globespan. Of course, we bring these shows to kind of, educate ourselves about the issues, bring some clarity on the issues, and hopefully it will allow us to get Guyana back on track. Special thanks again to Hart and his team and the team at Globespan for making this possible, ensuring that every Monday and Tuesday we can have these discussions to again enlighten ourselves about these issues. Tonight's theme is about when will Guyana breathe again. There's the COVID issue, and I know. Of lately, they've even expanded. They've seen some resurgence of some COVID activities in Guyana. The airport has been further closed until I think August 1st. So there's signs of that. But more critically is the political stifling that's happening in Guyana. And today, of course, was the CCJ hearing by all sides. And they will deliberate over it over the next week and have some orders by next Wednesday. With me are two very illustrious, young, aggressive politicians who've been around for a long time, but was waiting for this moment to bring some oxygen to the politics of Guyana and give us some relief. And tonight, of course, we have Timothy Jonas, an attorney, and he was one of the presenters today on the CCJ case, and I think he was on behalf of ANUG. He is an executive ANUG, and of course we have from Liberty and Justice for Party presidential candidate, Mr. Lenox Shuman. Welcome, guys. But before I do that, I must say a lot of our viewers and a lot of our Facebook commentators were expecting a very good show tonight with you guys, and of course with our guest from APNU, Norton. Aubrey Norton, for whatever reason, could not make it this evening on late notice. He let us know that he could not make it, so we do apologize for many viewers out there who would not be able to hear from him and to hear from the APNU side. This is, of course, an ongoing saga with most of the media, I would imagine, unable to get hold of APNU speakers and APNU executives who can present a credible case for their side of the story. And much of the story today that unfolded, and much of the story that has been unfolding for the past 18 months, a huge element of that was APNU, and it sometimes hurts us that they are unable to come and explain their position, and it seems as though we might be taking a certain side, but we certainly not. But we do have Timothy Jonas and we do have Lenox Shuman, who are credible and, of course, can handle themselves in these positions. Well, today was a CCJ, and I want to ask Jonas, who was deeply involved as a presenter and, of course, mostly as a listener, like all of us, trying to understand some of the deeper issues. Tell us, Jonas, what did you observe? How was it today? How did it go? And was it what maybe you were expecting?
Hi, Salim. Good evening. Lenox, good to see you. I don't think there were very many surprises today. It was long and torturous. You've got one applicant, you've got 10 named respondents, each of them represented by lawyers. The paperwork was ridiculous. I mean, I think there were nearly 2,000 pages of court records by the time we got done. And if everybody has something to say, necessarily, even if you give everybody half an hour or 45 minutes, you're looking at 5-6 hours of talk. And I'm afraid that's exactly what it was. That being said, the issues were predictable and were anticipated, and I don't think anything arose that we didn't expect. The first question was whether the CCJ had jurisdiction. As you know, that is the main thing that everybody talked about. I think there was some comfort taken by one side in a clause in the Constitution that says in this particular kind of case, the decision of the Court of Appeal is final. And final traditionally means not appealable. So when the Justices Dawn Gregory and Brassington Reynolds handed down their majority decision, I believe that one side felt a certain comfort that this couldn't go to the CCJ. I did not agree with that. I think their comfort was unfounded, but the CCJ has to make that decision as to whether an appeal did lie. The essence of the argument is quite simple, actually. If you're asked to interpret the Constitution, if the Constitution, if Article 174 says you have power to interpret the Constitution, and I come to you suing Lenox for $50, even though I put at the head of my application Article 177, I'm not asking with the Constitution, and therefore the court should technically say this isn't something that we have jurisdiction to hear, case dismissed. And if the court doesn't do that, if the court awards me my $50 judgment against Lenox, they're acting without jurisdiction, and their order therefore is not an Article 177 order. It is something else, and therefore is not protected by this clause that says it shall be final. And as the thrust of the argument, that what was put before the Court of Appeal was not within Article 177, and therefore when the Court of Appeal made an order based on that application, that was not an Article 177 order, and therefore it wasn't protected by the non-appeal clause, the do not appeal clause. That's what the CCJ has to decide. I also wasn't surprised that not very many of the contributors today spent a great deal of time trying to defend the substance of the Court of Appeal decision. I, again, didn't agree with the Court of Appeal. So I am hoping for a good outcome next week. I'm hoping that the CCJ rules it has jurisdiction, that the Court of Appeal acted without jurisdiction, and therefore it is not an Article 177 order, and that it sets it aside. Yeah. If that happens, I don't know what the next trick in the bag of tricks will be. That we have to wait and see.
Yeah. In a nutshell, I know you presented today. What was some of your points in your delivery?
Exactly that. It was just, they say that if you can't explain it, if you can't explain it so that a 5-year-old will understand, it means you don't understand it well enough yourself. There's a basic saying like that. And I'm afraid it's not always true. So you have to give the English language, which is intrinsically ambiguous and vague and subject to double entendre and all kinds of problems, you have to try to give English language the exactitude of maths. Mm-hmm. And that's a lawyer's predicament. It can never happen, but you try the best you can with it. So it was essentially to say to the court, look, this lady, Miss David, has come to complain that Justice Claudette Singh has instructed Lowenfield prepare his report based on the recount. That's her complaint. So when she comes to the Court of Appeal saying, please interpret the Constitution, she doesn't want an interpretation of the Constitution. She wants something to stop Lowenfield from doing the report based on the recount. Mm-hmm. And essentially that's what I was saying.
Gotcha. Lenox, I'm sure you watched all day, like so many other Guyanese, and the good thing about it was online, and everybody else was online who were also presenting. So, what were some of the highlights that you thought were interesting, and that you can share with our viewers?
Well, Salim, good evening, Tim. It's good to see you too. For all your viewers, I want to say hello, and express my disappointment that Aubrey Norton is not on the show. I was quite looking forward to that. But I think, judging from today, they may be in some kind of a strategy meeting and trying to plan on what is next in that bag of tricks that Tim talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to thank you for your compliment when you said young men, vibrant young men. I think you were talking about Tim, because I think I'm a little bit older than Tim. So the compliment is to you, Tim. But I'm no lawyer, but I think I've read enough at this point, going through from 2018 to now, that I probably should be on my way to a law degree for all that I would have read and participated in, right? Well, we're part of the joiner, and we were represented by Tim and Ralph, who did a stellar job in presenting our case today, along with the other parties. And I found it very, very interesting. I think, like I said, I'm no lawyer, but when I looked at the questions that were coming from the judges, it was very telling in what it is that they're trying to interrogate and how they're viewing the law. I think the way I look at things is mostly, what questions am I being asked? And that would tell about the person's intent. And I think that was very evident in the judges today and what they were trying to interrogate and get. If you're making an argument for jurisdiction, then how now do you separate the electoral process from 163 to 174, as these guys were talking about today? I found those things very telling. I must say that I admire the talent that we have, or that we're presenting today. To me, that was, I was using a term that I would not use again earlier before we spoke, but to me, that was a legal dance that I don't think a lot of people are exposed to. It's unfortunate we don't get to see these things often enough. Unfortunate, but good. Because I think it also presented a clear picture of where Guyana is. And we could go down the road with that a bit. I was a bit flabbergasted, if I were to put it that way, or a bit, flabbergasted at the Attorney General's presentation. I was quite surprised to see that for a party that continues to say that we are a sovereign country, leave us alone, that the majority of their legal team was not from Guyana.
CARICOM.
All of these things, it's all coming to bear now. And once again, I want to maybe venture a guess. Aubrey Norton and them are in some strategy meeting tonight in trying to figure out what next trick to pull out of that hat.
There was a lot of chit chat and discussion around the word valid throughout the deliberations today. What was the general feeling? Because I sense that one of the judges were asking whether the word valid needs to be discussed, or even should have been ruled on, because the Constitution is pretty clear. It says most votes. So how did that discussion go, Timothy, on the word valid, the insertion or the introduction or the innovation of the word valid as it relates to the recount especially?
Well, I think this is where having a lot of minds look at something helped, because what one of the judges did, and I appreciated his approach because it showed how ridiculous the whole thing was. He asked the question whether anybody felt that the section in the Constitution that talks about the most votes meant the most invalid votes. So he specifically asked one of the lawyers that, do you think the Court of Appeal could have possibly said that valid means the most invalid votes? And as soon as you look at it that way, you realize how nonsensical the whole thing was in the Court of Appeal. Because obviously, valid votes could only mean valid votes. But that is not what the complaint before the Court of Appeal was. The complaint before the Court of Appeal was that Justice Singh has, by her letter, told Lowenfield to go and prepare a report based on the recount. And that's what they were trying to stop. They weren't trying to stop anything else. And therefore, they couldn't go back to the first court because in the previous cases, Ulita Moore and the others, the High Court has very clearly said that these are issues for an election petition. And therefore, they found something that they thought was clever to pretend that this was an issue that required this grand interpretation of the Constitution that votes meant valid votes, which every fool knows, and decided to go to pretend that the objection to the decision taken by the Commission to use the recount had something to do with the question of valid votes. But a recount has nothing to do with validity. A recount is what it says it is. It's a count. So when you count from 1 to 100, and the word valid doesn't come into that, or invalid. It's just a numerical exercise.
Yeah.
And that is where we had to go into a criticism of the approach taken by the Court of Appeal, because it has nothing to do with validity or invalidity. It got to do with numbers.
Yeah. Coming back to the whole concept of valid and invalid, both of you and your parties were deeply involved in the 33 days recount at the convention center. When you were doing your count, and you can speak for yourselves and for your party, when you were doing the recount with so many other parties, the private sector, the Chamber of Commerce, other NGOs, you had the CARICOM representatives there. Were you counting valid votes, or what were you counting if you weren't counting valid votes?
That's very interesting. I know when we were there, I want to touch back on a point that Tim brought up there. It was Justice Witt that asked a question about, are we counting invalid votes? And I thought that was very clever, because towards the end of the session today, there was also the question about the qualitative component of the vote, of the ballots. And one of the judges said, well, is that not housed under Article 163, which goes back to the Ulita Moore case? But if you look at the Representation of People Act under Section 98, there are 7 specific things that actually invalidates a ballot. And each ballot represents 1 vote, of which one of them is lack of one for mark, marked for multiple parties, amongst other things, right? So there are 7 components on there. Now, I want to touch on this a bit also. And it goes back to the populating of the SOPs, the Statement of Poll. In order to populate the SOP, all statutory documents have to be present. So if I don't have a birth certificate, an ID card, I have to have a birth certificate. Someone has to vouch for me, letter of employment, oath of identity, things like those, right? In order to populate and to vote, let's get to the voting part first. The vote, I have to identify myself very explicitly, and all party members have to agree that I am me, and I'm that person on the sheet. That's one. The second thing is, when you're done voting, coming down to the end of the process here, before you start counting the votes, you actually have a blank SOP, a statement of poll. And on that statement of poll, there are 2 spots that are actually written very clearly. I think if you look at, and we don't have that right now, but you could research it. Many of these things are online. In box 1, column 3 or 4, it says total number of valid votes cast for each political party. Right? That is in column 4 of box 1. If you look at box 2 of the SOP, we're talking the SOP, it says total number of valid votes cast for all political parties. So just by virtue of producing an SOP, a statement of poll, all of the statutory documents are present. So you're now going to populate that if you do not have valid votes presented, because that now is part of the validity or verification process. Now, if you want to go into a recount scenario, and you're
just explain what have happened before the recount, right?
Right. That would have happened at the statement of poll, at the polling place.
Exactly, correct.
So now, if you're to go to the recount, and you count the number of votes that are in each ballot box, it is not a matter of asking if poll books are here, this is that, because my understanding and based on guidance from the commission is that those documents were to accompany the ballot boxes separate, not to be sealed in the ballot box. Now, if you look at the statement of recount, in the very same spots as were populated in the SOPs, in box 1, column 4, it has the very similar words. In box 2, very similar words to the SOPs. So if you want to see the number of valid votes that were cast at any particular station, all you have to do as a commission is to now take that SOP that I know they have, take that SOP and compare it to the SOR. And I think you are going to find that those are so closely matched, and it destroys their argument. Now let's say for some odd reason they're unwilling to do that. After each recount, we're given a certificate of the district, right? On that certificate, once again, in 2 separate places, it also has the total number of valid votes per district. And we are given 10 of those for regions 1 to 10, right? And then you go into the matrices produced by Mr. Lowenfield. And this is just a matter of record. You could take a look at it online. I think every political party has their own copy of these documents. If you look at the matrices that were produced by Mr. Keith Lowenfield, in the far right column, it has total number of valid votes cast. So the validity of the votes in itself is actually protected from the get-go when that person goes in there. And one thing that we touched on earlier also is if you want to go through the verification of the ballot and all that stuff, it is scanned through the recount with a UV light, and then it is checked for the 6-digit stamp on the back, and then it's checked for the actual voting component. So I think what the judges would have alluded to today is that all of these things are already taken care of in law. And Mr. Mendez in himself presented that. He said the Representation of People Act already describes how you validate a ballot. And one of the judges said, well, if you can't do that, then it now falls to the Constitution for an elections petition.
Yeah. And Timothy, on your end, what were you guys counting for 33 days if it was not valid votes?
Well, you go back to valid, and I don't. All right, if you look at the legislation, the structure of the legislation, you pick up a ballot out of the box, and the ballot may not have the stamp of the ballot station, in which case you have to reject it. The ballot may have the person put in their X in 2 places. You have to reject that. You don't know who you voted for. The ballot may not reflect the watermark when you test it against the UV light, so you know it's a fake ballot. You have to reject that. So when you say valid vote, you're talking about a ballot that passes all of those tests, that the intentionally vote is clearly there. It has the 6-digit stamp. It has the ultraviolet light showing the watermark, so that those various safeguards are all passed, and you then treat it as a valid vote, and you credit it to whoever party the person has voted for. So valid, in contrast to rejected, means 6-digit stamp, X clearly seen, passes the watermark, that is valid. This does not have anything to do with a previous screening test, which is, did a dead or an overseas person go to vote on polling day? That information simply is not in the ballot box.
Got you. Now, next Wednesday, there will be a ruling by the judges. What are they specifically for our viewers' benefit? What exactly will they be ruling on based on the deliberations today? And of course, they'll be doing their homework over the next week. What are they making a ruling on specifically? And what do you believe might be some of their intent?
Two things. First of all, they have to decide if they have jurisdiction. That depends on whether the Court of Appeal exceeded its jurisdiction. So if the Court of Appeal wrongly made an order that has nothing to do with Article 177, then the CCJ may well decide it has jurisdiction and set it aside. And interestingly enough, that turns on exactly the same confusion that we were just talking about. I'm sorry that Aubrey Norton is not on your show. I really believe strongly that for a balanced discussion, you need both sides to be present. And the fact of the matter is that, unfortunately, in this case, both Lenox and I, who were present at Ashman's building, who saw what happened, who were present during the recount, we've come to the same conclusion because we both saw what happened. And there is a party that is saying that these things did not happen, and a representative needs to be there. I was delighted when I heard that Aubrey Norton would be on the show. As you know, I had made the suggestion to you some weeks ago that you really do need to have an APNU representative here to give the other side of it, or else we're all, we're the pastor speaking to the choir. We're all in the same church. I believe that APNU have repeated so often the cliche fraud is fraud without looking behind it to see how this thing works. They have repeated their mantras so often that they may be coming to believe it themselves, because it was genuinely argued today that the Court of Appeal could have some attention paid to dead and overseas voters. And the dead and overseas voters argument was presented successfully in the Court of Appeal. Now, I'm sorry, I just do not see that has any credence whatsoever. But it has been said so often, it has been said repeatedly, it has been said and said and said and said, until it begins to sound like maybe it's got some plausibility to it. But I don't think it is relevant, and I believe that we will have a determination on that in a week.
Mm-hmm. So if the CCJ rules that they do have jurisdiction, does that mean there will be an extended period of continued trial on this issue?
No, they're going to decide both limbs at the same time. If they do not have jurisdiction, that's the end of it. If they have jurisdiction, they will make the orders they need to make. So they will either decide the Court of Appeal was right, or they will decide it was wrong and set it aside and decide what they can do to fix the problem that we're in.
Gotcha.
So it will be in one fell swoop on Wednesday. That will be the end of it.
Good. So let's assume they do the ruling comes out that they do have, or the Court of Appeal did have jurisdiction, and the ruling stands. What recourse would the PVP have to ensure that the Lowenfield report does not go through?
Well, interestingly enough, even with the Court of Appeal order, Lowenfield didn't have authority to do what he did. I mean, Lowenfield has invented his own figures, decided to throw out votes all by himself. I don't know where he got that from, and I don't know where he told himself he got the authority from.
But it seems like that's the report. APNU is banking on, and it seems like that's the report that will go through. If should the Court of Appeal have the authority?
Tim, if I may jump in there, Alam, I think that is a bit inconsequential. The process that I just described to you about the validation of the votes and what it says, I have the document right here, actually, a copy of the matrices. And it says in the general election, 460,352 total valid vote cast. And within this document in itself, it clearly states that the People's Progressive Party would have won.
Yeah, but did Lowenfield produce two reports? One report did show the PVP with 15,000 plus votes ahead of APNU, and then a subsequent report, which is the most recent, that showed a significant, almost 70% landslide win by APNU.
Once again, I don't think that this would be the consequence. The electoral process may not be the consequence that we have to look at right now, even though that is immediate. I think the larger consequence is the overstep by the appeals court in a jurisdiction where they had none. I think that would be the larger issue, because on the ground, fundamentally the numbers would not change. Mr. Lowenfield does not have the kind of latitude to do what he wants. He has to operate under the commission, and the chair, being an executive chair, has that responsibility. You also have to remember that Madam Chair ruled on a very similar case in the 1997 elections petition case with Esther Pereira. And she is perfectly aware of what the laws say. That is why her presentation, in my view, was of that nature to the appeals court. And I don't think that there is anything further that needed to be said at the CCJ, in my view. Maybe Tim has a different perspective on that. But Lowenfield's position and the numbers on the ground do not change. I think the only thing that we have to be very cautious about is the overstep by the appeals court.
But and Timothy, isn't it the CEO's responsibility or role to present a report to the chairwoman, who will then make a declaration? So if everything was to go through and the Court of Appeal did have authority to hear this case, and now it's back into GCOM's court, or GCOM's field, or whatever it is, what report is the chairwoman going to get, and from who?
Lowenfield and the entire secretariat is subject to the instructions of GCOM, of the commission. So when the chairman decided that she would instruct Lowenfield to issue a report under Section 96 using the recount numbers, that was definitive. He was obligated to prepare his report and allocate seats in Parliament and all of that and declare a winner using the numbers in the recount. So he acted against his instructions and therefore acted against the Constitution and unlawfully when he did his own thing and used his own magic, much as Mingo did some months ago. And the fact that votes may mean valid votes doesn't change that, because that is something for GCOM to decide. And the only conclusion to be drawn, the only inference to be drawn from the fact that a letter went out to Lowenfield to say count, prepare the report on the basis of the recount, is that GCOM sat and determined by majority or whoever, we don't know, because the proceedings of GCOM are insulated, they're sacrosanct. We are not allowed to inquire into. In fact, the legislation says that their minutes are inadmissible in court. We're not allowed to know what they did. But from the fact that those instructions went to Lowenfield, we can infer safely that the commission met and took the decision that it would be using the recount votes, the recount figures, to make its declaration. And those were the instructions Lowenfield got. He is not entitled to do anything except follow those instructions and do the maths.
And speaking of Lowenfield, there was a criminal charge against him for, what was it, willfully breaching the trust of the public by submitting a fraudulent report by a citizen of Guyana. What consequence does these charges have over the next week or two as things begin to quickly unfold?
Well, it certainly gets political mileage, doesn't it? Everybody likes to see that, and the crowd gets to yell hooray. I'm not a criminal lawyer, so I'm not going to speculate as to, how good the charge is and whether it will succeed and what evidence they have. I wasn't consulted, and it's not my area of expertise.
Well, would
So
it limit his ability to act based on his responsibility?
certainly not. Criminal charges, a charge is a charge. We know about somebody else who has 19 against him. None of them are proven. And that's why I say that often this thing has political mileage more than anything else. So we have to wait and see if it's real or if it is a spin.
Yeah, and in fact, Lenox, I know during the deliberations today it was brought up also, and I think Mendes defended it, saying that there was 115,000 fraudulent votes, and then I think Mendes, commented that these were just allegations. It was just a letter saying that 115 might have been, patched up together somehow. What were your thoughts when you heard that?
Salim, these are things that we would have known all along. We were present. I was present at the polling place where the APNU folks are saying that people died and migrated, and I know for a fact that they're on the ground. One of them is my cousin. So this arbitrary number that Lowenfield threw out, I don't know where it would have come from. Once again, it baffles me, and every time I use that word, I have to chuckle because I think of it. It baffles me as to how they could think that they're going to get to this point and do whatever they want. 115 votes is not a small number. That is 25, actually a bit more than that of the voting population.
Yeah,
when you look at what Tim spoke about under the media tent, 5 people going back and voting multiple times and multiple times. Now imagine having to do that, and that is an unsurmountable task for 15,000 votes. Imagine having to do that, or conceptualizing in your mind how to get that done for 115,000 people. It is beyond reason that you could actually undertake that. How do you find 115,000 people to come and vote in Guyana, and no one would have seen them, and all of the political parties and the observer and the election machinery could not catch any of them? Those are some very serious allegations. And once again, when he talked about, when Mr. Bassa Williams said that they presented evidence, Mr. Mendes said there is no evidence. All you presented are letters written by Joe Harmon about accusations. When we were in that Mekong process, all that it was accusation, accusation, accusation. And their end line was, it will be presented to the commission in due course. When we as political parties asked to check the counterfoil to see if these things are in fact true, the folks who were participating in that exercise with APNU simply said, no, you can't see that. That is our information. So once again, all they would have found is this caveat to throw out allegations. And I don't, at least, I don't know if Tim is in receipt of any evidence that was presented at the appeals level, or if there's any evidence presented at the CCJ's level. But I have not seen any.
Yeah. So we had, of course, we heard the CCJ today. It's been an ongoing saga over the last 18 months. So while we can't breathe fully, we can take a little breath from now until next Wednesday, until we hear about this again. We've got a week more that we can take a little breather, and hopefully after that, something good can happen and we can breathe all over again. I know Timothy was deeply involved, and he might have been spending many nights preparing for this since last Friday, I believe. So he seems very tired and he's sniffling. Hope there's no COVID-related issue there, and so on. But I hope all is well. But let's switch a bit up to the actual meat of the matter. The U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo made a very strong statement today. He said, ensure that those who undermine Guyana's democracy are held accountable. You know, who do you think he's referring to when he says those who undermine Guyana's democracy? Is it it's got to be a party, it's got to be a group of people. Who is he referring to, and why would he use such strong words?
I hope that he is not referring to me and Tim. That would be very, very disturbing if he's talking about us. But I want to touch on that a bit, because you see what these guys have done is that they know they could not go with Mingo's declaration because the international community was watching. They could not go with any of the two declarations. They could not go with Lowenfield's first set of fraudulent numbers, and they most definitely could not go with the second report that he presented. Mm-hmm. So what they're trying to do is to find a little legal crack with a sympathetic court that would legitimize their position and thus make at least escape sanctions in that sense. But where we are right now, and provided that the ruling comes down on Wednesday as we're anticipating, I don't see where they could maneuver legally now to try to address that. And I hope, not hope, the sanctions or the international community could not bring anything to bear until all of these processes were completed. We're hopeful that after Wednesday comes up, the report is presented. I anticipate that Keith Lowenfield will kick the can further down the road. The commission may have to suspend him. It goes to Myers. She'll do a whole lot of another set of math, and she may end up being suspended or terminated again. And then it will eventually come back to the commission at some point. I think that is where things are. I hope that the Americans are not crying wolf, because this year has gone on for a long time. The country is struggling. I mean, if I were to digress a bit, Santa Rosa now has 50% of the country's COVID cases, and that is because the necessary and the requisite support is not there. You've got children who are writing the NGSA exams. School has been closed for a few months. They have not been in a classroom. They're ill-prepared. In fact, they're not prepared at all. But yet you're taking them to go and write an exam that is going to impact their futures, the country's future. And yet there seems to be no person that they could turn to from a policy position. They don't have a budget to operate on to be able to do a lot of things. So what these guys have done is really brought this country to its knees. And I hope once again that the international partners, that they're not just crying wolf and issuing
I think we lost Lenox there.
Are you there, Lenox? I think Lenox might have stepped up. So Timothy, same question to you. What's okay? Now you're back.
The network is a little bit poor here, but if I noticed what I lost it, I was saying empty threats, because there is only so much that this country can take before a lot more start to fail.
Yeah. And Timothy, same question to you. I mean, Pompeo made a very, very strong statement, and it seems not to take an effect on Granger or his entire APNU team. In fact, they're still talking tough about not conceding and waiting until declaration, and even their voices in the media are speaking loudly and confidently that they have won this election. Why such arrogance by APNU?
This is really part of our problem, isn't it, Salim? Mm-hmm. You see, it's so easy to blame the other side, and we do finger pointing so well. I have actually seen party loyalists condemn people who have criticized APNU by saying, imagine you are so unpatriotic that you want sanctions to be imposed on Guyana. And the irony and hypocrisy in that is so staggering that I'll start laughing. It's not funny anymore. Because nobody wants sanctions to hit Guyana.
Absolutely
We
not.
are the second poorest country next to Haiti. We do not have that layer of fat that Venezuela had, that it could endure for 10 years of Chavez and now Maduro before it hits rock bottom. They were a thriving, fantastic economy, oil-based, but excellent standard of living. Guyanese used to hustle to go over there and live, and now they are rock bottom. We are already close to rock bottom. We don't have the luxury of sanctions and enduring and thinking that we can link up with anybody else. If we face isolation now, we will be back to the days where we are eating Edo and plantain with saltfish for breakfast and for breakfast again tomorrow. We will be back to trouble. And the thing is, the APNU propaganda machine have been able to make this the fault of the other side. But the question I have to ask is, if you are willing to rig an election so that you stay in power, even though you know that the American ambassador saw you, the Canadian and British high commissioners saw you, the entire international community saw you, and all the third parties and the PPP saw you, so that you have isolated yourself and you faced economic devastation as a result of sanctions. You are willing to allow Guyana to burn economically, to turn into rubble economically, just so you can stay in power, and that is somebody else's fault. That is the argument that is being presented. You are willing to rule and watch Guyana turn to ashes just so you can be in charge, having rigged an election.
Yep.
That is inconceivable to me, but that is what we are seeing.
Yeah, and that is certainly sucking the oxygen out of Guyana. The people, our daily lives, and of course the economy. With that, we'll take a short break, and we'll be back right after the break. Lenox.
Flights are available to and from Guyana on Eastern Airlines from July 10th. Call Travelspan in New York, 718-845-0437. And in Guyana, call 227-1701. That's right, call Travelspan in New York, 718-845-0437. And in Guyana, 227-1701. And book your flights to and from Guyana on Eastern Airlines.
Having trouble finding a location to grow your business? We have the perfect space available for retails, offices, and apartments. We are located at 3A North Road between Wellington and Camp Street. Contact us today on 624-0692. That's 624-0692 for more information.
January marks 1 year since Globespan 24/7 embarked on this initiative to offer a platform that brings in all sides, all points of view, and all concerns. Viewers in Guyana and across the world are participating in discussions that are bringing to light issues relating to social, economic, and political matters that have been plaguing our nation. Globespan's platform offers Guyanese to express their concerns and discuss solutions in the political realm, thereby addressing the polarized situation. Discussions also include social ills, such as alcoholism, domestic violence, and suicides that have been plaguing the people. The platform also mitigates the brain drain by having speakers that live in Guyana and across the world participate in these discussions. This concept will avail a broader view for the benefit of all Guyanese, so Globespan needs your support to offset the expenses. Kindly contribute by clicking the link in the description to help support these programs.
Welcome back from wherever you are. I really appreciate you spending your Wednesday evening with us to talk about some very exciting happening in Guyana. You know, like never before. You know, Guyana politics, you know, dominates everything. Sadly, And I think politics, when a government is as big as the Guyana government, it sucks the oxygen and it leaves us all without a breath. And sadly, it's unfolding in front of our eyes. I've heard many commentators talking about so many ways that we are dying, and for sure, with what's happening in the world with COVID and violence against minorities, I think Guyana is also under severe stress and can hardly breathe. There was a question that came online. I wanted to ask this one very quick to Timothy. Is it possible for the Madam Chair to make a declaration without Lowenfield or Myers? And if she's going to make such a declaration, on what, with what result and from what data?
GCOM can do almost anything it wants, but if I were her, because the Constitution says that the Commission should act on the advice of the CEO as the allocation of seats, I know his function is just maths. It's just a count of the votes divided by 65 and decide who's getting how many seats in Parliament. I would still, if Lowenfield refuses to do his job, fire him and appoint another CEO. If that CEO refuses, fire them and appoint another one. I would get a CEO to do it because the Constitution contemplates that the Commission takes its advice from a CEO as to the allocation of seats in the House.
Does anyone within GCOM have a responsibility for a CEO if a CEO is not there?
Well, in any secretariat, in any organization, you have a deputy in case your CEO gets a heart attack and drops down. Mm-hmm. But there is always a contingency that you can follow. So GCOM has hiring and firing power, and I wouldn't make that a big obstacle at all.
Mm-hmm. So there is a chance that she can, or not she can, but there is a process by which a declaration can be legally sought through a CEO, whether it's Lowenfield or not, and then So, and coming back to the matter on hand, we just saw Suriname. I think Monday, they swore in their new prime minister and cabinet and everything else, and there you've had a much more stronger sort of global criminal type guy who lost, and he said, you know what, for the good of my people, I'm just gonna concede and let the will of the people go by. What is it that's so hard for APNU to accept? And every day, instead of talking about democracy and instead of talking about all these things, you're hearing the tough talk from our honest, from President Granger that I can't concede until there's a declaration, and then you hear Harmon is saying that in fact he's instructing Granger that Granger will not concede and so on. Why the holdout? Why APNU is so adamant about not conceding, not looking at the numbers and saying clearly this is not going to happen, so I'm gonna do it the hard way?
One of the things that let's go back to what happened, right? And we'll keep rehashing this story, and I quite agree with Tim that it is unfair because it would have been nice to get the Aubrey Nortons and the Vincent Alexanders on the show to have a healthy discussion on it and to take sense from nonsense in this case. But every single mission has come out and said the international community, the OAS, which comprises 36 states, the European Union, another significant bloc, the ABC, separate, the CARICOM, right? If you look at just the state, it is like the entire democratic world is saying that the elections were free, fair, and credible. And even CARICOM, and a lot of them are relying on the report of CARICOM because Granger said that CARICOM is the most trusted or something like that interlocutor of this process. Now that report came out, and every single person that has spoken out against rigging has come under fire. To the point that after these elections close, we are going to have to practice a lot of diplomacy. And diplomacy and politics are somewhat similar. We have never practiced politics in Guyana. Politics is about how do I compromise, how do I massage my way to get the things that are important to the people that I want. It is not about how do I fight you to the bitter end so that we destroy this, all right? So when you look at that, Carl Greenwich put things in perspective 2 days ago when he said that if we had conducted ourselves in the right way, we would not come under attack. And I want to suspect that at this juncture, what Mr. Granger is trying to do is to save face. He knows that he can't move, and he knows he can't just concede because his party they'd probably have a few words for him. And he knows that he did not win. So he's caught between a rock and a rock. Forget the rock and a hard place, between a rock and a rock. Mm-hmm. So his only out right now, internationally, is to say that I have abided, which he's always said, even though we know it's contrary to the fact. I've always abided by the court ruling. I've always abided by the Constitution. And when Madam Chair now finally issues that report and declaration, that he could finally say, well, here's the evidence. I have waited until the commission would have made a declaration. I had committed to that. The declaration is made, so I'm going to concede at this juncture. I think that is the only escape route for him to save face. As for the rest of the folks that are within the hierarchy of the APNO AFC, I want to think that maybe they have a lot in the closet. I remember when I got into politics, I went and saw someone, and he's asking about skeletons that I have in my closet. I said, look, as a pilot, I have zero latitude in what I can and cannot do. I can't be caught drinking and driving because right off the bat, I would be prohibited from entering a variety of countries. I cannot be caught for any kind of illegal activity because it produces a criminal record and thus it invalidates my license, right? So I can't because I need security clearance from government to be able to operate an aircraft in their airspace. Now, if you're to go and see where these guys are at, I think some of them would have gone so far down the line that they don't have a skeleton in their closet. Some of them potentially have entire graveyards in their closet. And I think that may be a fear that if people start digging, they are going to find things that they would have done in office that would have compromised themselves and compromised the government of Guyana. And thus they are fearful of leaving office because then it gets uncovered.
Yeah. And again, we are sorry that an APNO representative could not be here to kind of provide some feedback and insight into these questions. But coming back, and Jonas, I wanted to ask you this because I know it's a big part of our political infrastructure. Do you think we are discounting or we are minimizing or not even listening to the 49% of Guyanese, predominantly of Afro descent, who are supporting APNO? That maybe, and yes, we can blame Granger and Harman for whatever record you have, but that has a grounding in the Afro population being the hopelessness that will follow a winner-take-all system. The aspiration of the Afro community sort of hit a dead end because the winner-take-all system does not give them access to the power, to the resource, and so on. And I'm saying this also not only from the Afro perspective. The Indians also have a similar fear should APNU continue, then they're out again for another 5 years. So but specifically, is some of these ground swelling and the hopelessness that can come after a PPP win, is that propelling APNU in some of their decision making and the delay and whatever else they might be doing?
I'm glad you raised that, because that is the core of our problem in Guyana. That is the bottom line. You've hit the nail on the head. You see, this problem with the winner take all, it doesn't just affect the top, it affects the bottom. And APNU United Guyana was created on the platform that we wanted constitutional reform. We challenged the AFC because they campaigned on a platform of constitutional reform, and then they let us down. And we are here for constitutional reform, for a system of shared governance. And I know that actually is not popular among PPP supporters now. And I will say with great respect, this is why I'm not a good politician. It's good for the country. So even if I lose friends about this, this is what we need. Because as you say, 4 to 5% of our population right now feels absolute despair because they see the party that represents their interests as being thrown out. And in a winner-take-all situation, it means they are thrown out with zero. What they don't realize, and what the PPP supporters don't realize, is that they don't benefit from that winner-take-all system. That winner-take-all system only benefits the politicians at the top who get to go into power and get to engage in the corrupt practices and feather their own nests and fill their own pockets. It is a perception that they feel. But the thing is, the reason it's so important is that the winner-take-all system allows those same politicians, when they become ministers, when they are in power, when they have the decision-making as to award a contract to Salim or to Lenox, and where the better kickback comes from. That winner-take-all system in itself allows them to make the secret deals, which gives rise to the corruption and makes them rich. And we have seen politicians become inordinately wealthy in this country that is second poorest to Haiti, that live in big houses. We've created Pradoville 1 and 2 for them. We have seen enormous accumulations of wealth. And that is because of the winner-take-all system. If our system was transparent so that both sides was sitting in the decision-making process, you would not have those opaque deals where oil blocks are given away, where radio licenses are given away, and kickbacks come and nobody knows how it happens, so that wealth is generated and nobody knows about. But more importantly, or equally importantly, when a party loses an election like this party has lost an election, they would not be fighting tooth and nail to stay in, because they know that by being put out of office, they lose the opportunity to dictate those same contracts and those same deals to feather their nests.
Yeah.
The winner-take-all system creates the corruption, and it divides and polarizes our society along ethnic lines. It hurts us at the top because it encourages corruption, and it hurts us at the bottom because those same people at the top try their best to divide their supporters so that they can stay in power and nobody will look at them critically. And that is what we're seeing. We're seeing corruption at the top and polarization at the bottom, all because of the winner-take-all system.
Absolutely. Now, Guyana, I want to introduce this question to you, Lenox. Guyana's had a very rocky relationship with democracy, and I wanted to, and you can give your perspective. I was wondering if that rocky relationship is a direct result of our ethnic makeup. In other words, if I can't win, I gotta rig it, and so on. So while and democracy in itself, in its true definition, has not permeated Guyana to any depth. We end democracy in Guyana at an election, at a vote. When we go and vote, That's the starting point of democracy, not the full length of democracy. Democracy ends when everyone have access to resources and power and everything else. So from your, if you can shed some light on it, do you believe that our ethnic breakdown has allowed us to embrace a very rocky relationship with democracy?
I want to I want to touch on Tim's point there. I think that is 50% of the equation, and respectfully, one of the things that we find really difficult is to reconcile what we're living in with history. The Wismar massacre continues to be one of the stains on Guyana's history. Let's leave Jim Jones, because that's an invention that was not part of our making. But the Wismar massacre has stained a lot of people's minds to the point where we have completely banished that from any kind of recognition, right? And if you look at how things would have been done through the PNC era, and I lived through a significant part of the PNC era, to know what happened, the long lines, the having to have a PNC card where you could butt in front, bully your way to the front, stuff like that. And I will say that Mr. Desmond Hoyt should be credited as bringing democracy back to Guyana. I would challenge anyone, because without Desmond Hoyt entering into the fray of politics and becoming the president, he is the one who championed free and fair elections. And people may not know about a lot of backstories that happened in when he wanted to imprison all of the top brass because they rigged the election. So now if you're to look at that, right, and then you bring it into when Chedi came into office, he did quite a lot of good things. And then when Mr. Jagdeo came into office, I don't think Chedi was up to the task. But if you look at the prison breaks, look at the way the police operated, Mr. Winston Felix and himself was the police commissioner, right? And then you now bring that into a pre-2015 campaign, when David Granger started to lead the PNC, before they started to form APNO. His championing call was that 400 young black youths perished under the PPP without reason, is the perception. Now, when you are going to go out and put in the public that 400 black youths perished under the PPP seemingly without reason, without looking at their criminal history, and when you actually break it down, and I asked Anand Prasad to send me the actual paper from that, when they did the expose on that, and they literally broke it down. It is not 400 black youths. But what Mr. Granger has done is driven a racial wedge in Guyana so that the blacks in Guyana feel that they have to fear the PPP. He has not done anything, and this is where I called out the ERC a few nights ago, that they're very focused on the people that they want to target. And those targets, unfortunately, are not resident in the APNO AFC or the PNC's camp. Had they been interested in race relations and ethnic harmony in Guyana, they would have gone after Mr. Granger and said, Mr. Granger, what you are doing is dangerous to this country, because instead of breaking that down and saying, look, there were 420 people that were killed. Of those 420, these are pretty much how it was broken down. These were criminals, these were not, these were by accident, and however else. And like I said, Stabber Hughes did a fantastic expose on that. And the ERC, unfortunately, has not done anything to bring Guyana. You've got a political leader.
And I agree, the fear.
President of the country. Let me finish, please. A political leader who is the president of the country, and he goes on a public platform funded by the state and says that 400 and change black youths died. What you are doing is sowing the seeds for racial discontent and racial disharmony. And when you start to do that, it drives fear into the PNC or APNU AFC supporters so that they now look at it from that, because remember, their leader, their king and savior, King David, is telling them this. How now do you want to come out of that? So while there is the economic side of which Tim is talking about, there is also the historical side and what these leaders are doing. I think it is very irresponsible. And the last point I want to make is that what we need in Guyana are strong institutions. A nation is only meant to protect the democratic structures or the structures within.
Absolutely.
Now, by creating those strong institutions and the strong infrastructure, we could embed within that infrastructure some very strong anti-grafting laws in Guyana. Because when you put that in the equation, the very same thing about, what are my kickbacks going to be, you eliminate that. But before we could get to that point, we need a police force that will be able to do its work without political interference.
Absolutely. And you're right that we have been using for the last 50 years the politics of fear. But I must remind you that the politics of fear needs a host. And we've got tons of hosts in Guyana. We have tons of opportunities that where these fear can grow. And sadly, our politicians have used those hosts and implanted fear, and that's why we are unable to breathe today, and that's why we're in the mess we are in today. There's a comment by a George Jaikaran on the screen. It says shared governance has to work. You do not have to sit down with the same corrupt coalition politician. Surely in a shared governance, the government, if they are committed to transparency, will reject those persons who do not embrace that concept. Now, nobody's suggesting shared governance here. Nobody's suggesting anything. What we are saying, or maybe you guys can if you're suggesting it, but at least Globespan and our commentators, we are open for all ideas. But we are suggesting that there needs to be a new dispensation, a new political landscape that allows everyone to participate, whatever you want to call it, however you want to name it. However, there needs to be a new approach. Timothy, I wanted to ask you, APNU in 2015 campaigned heavily on this concept of inclusivity. In fact, they won because of Indian crossover votes. They had more than 12 to 15,000 Indian votes that allowed them to tip the scale for them to win. There was a lot of hope and expectation from them to build a very harmonious society that would allow for everyone to be part of it and to have a sense of and a stake in the process. How did they go wrong, and what did they do wrong, and did it cost them this election?
I'm going to talk about your premise first, because you said APNU won because they got a lot of Indo-Guyanese votes. Of course, you're right about that, but we need to look at that from both sides of the coin. Right now, if you look at the result of the election in 2015, 2015 represented the possible high mark of anti-PPP sentiment, whether by traditional PPP supporters, whether by the independent voters such as myself, traditional APNU voters. It was a time when after 23 years of PPP governance, there was a view that the corruption was so bad and Granger looked like a plausible alternative. So it can be used as a benchmark, a test, to see how many PPP party loyalists will vote PPP regardless. And the fact is that APNU won that elections with AFC by only 4,500 votes. Let's call it 5,000 votes. Now, 5 years later, APNU have lost an election by 25,000 votes. 10,000 for small parties. I'm sorry, 15,000, 10,000 for small parties, 5,000 for PPP. So the number of swing voters in Guyana is about 25 to 30,000. The reason I'm saying that is that neither side can claim any moral high ground about racial integration or about getting crossover votes, because there is a demographic in Guyana that will vote APNU come hell or high water, and there is a demographic in Guyana that will vote PPP come hell or high water. And whether that demographic is pure Afro or pure Indo or just ethnically identifies with one side or is Amerindian or is Portuguese, it doesn't matter. We have the numbers from a comparison of 2015 and 2020. And the fact is that come hell or high water, PPP at its lowest ebb will only lose by 5,000 or 6,000 votes. They have a demographic advantage. That is what makes our winner-take-all system unfair. Because the fact is that the amount of party loyalists, the fraction of Guyana society that are party loyalists one way or another, because of ethnic identification, gives PPP an advantage at the poll. They don't have 51% automatically, but they got 40, whereas APNU only got 35. So that creates an unfair democracy in Guyana, and that is why part of our problem is that we have a fight every 5 years, because there is a perception that our system is not fair to everybody. And in order for our system to be fair to everybody, we need to devise a system that both groups feel adequately represented, whatever the outcome is. We have now a swing vote. The indigenous community have, for the most part, supported the PPP. I know a lot of them have supported APNU, but I think for the most part, Lenox will correct me if I'm wrong, but they also have shown themselves to be independent by the support Lenox has gotten in Region 7 and 8. But we have two large groups, and we need to end divisive politics in Guyana, and the way to end it is to persuade those two large groups to either to reject the party of their ethnic loyalty or to force a system where both of them are represented, no matter what the outcome is. The winner-take-all system polarizes us. It creates a dependency. It encourages corruption. It has us where we are now. And in 5 years, it'll have us right back here again, unless we fix it.
Do you believe that APNU had a shot at it over the last 5 years, but they blew it?
Definitely. You see, in 2015, despite my own quiet reservations, I had had enough of PPP corruption and I voted APNU. I have been a loyal AFC supporter since they were created. And what APNU needed to do was demonstrate leadership that was inclusive. You do not have inclusive leadership where you shackle Ashni Singh and parade him before the TV cameras for the viewing public, and you shackle Winston Brassington and parade him before the viewing public for the entertainment of the crowds. You do not encourage a feeling of togetherness by doing that. What needed to be done was inclusivity in a real way of reaching out across the table to the PPP folk and saying, come and help us, come and be part of the process, here's our transparent system. That will give both sides a sense of confidence. Let us fix this, because when we were out of power, we wanted to fix it and say, let's have some kind of sharing. Now we're in power, suddenly we're not talking about it anymore. That hypocrisy has been demonstrated by both sides. And every 5 years, we're doing this nonsense. At some point, we got to learn.
Mm-hmm. And Lenox, what's your thoughts on this? Your feelings on it?
Well, it is something that we still have to sort through. It requires. I find that the majority of Guyanese keep talking about Indo-Afro, but yet there's a significant indigenous population that has never really been represented in government, never been represented in any capacity. You tell me about, we could start from the top. An Indigenous president, none. Indigenous prime minister, none. You've always had a token minister of Indigenous Peoples Affairs. Indigenous ambassadors, none. Indigenous permanent secretary, none. Indigenous deputy permanent secretary, judges, none. So I'm not saying that because I want to whine about it. I'm saying that the system has, by default, while you talk about, or while you see this Black Lives Matter movement in Guyana talk about white privilege, in Guyana you don't have an Indo or Afro privilege, but you most definitely have an underprivileged indigenous population. So we have to find a way to not only look at the Indo-Afro population. Yes, they're the larger groups, but we also have to find a formula where every single Guyanese gets a piece of the pie. And I think that is what Tim is alluding to in terms of the shared governance. But I think it needs to go broader than just an Indo-Afro population. We have to find a way to create equity in a society where the word in itself seems a bit tabooed. You talk about equity in Guyana, people sit there and say, well, what the hell are you talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Right? You go in there, well, it's we time now, it's we time now.
Yeah, well,
what is going to happen after these elections are settled? I don't think that the governance structures in Guyana will be the same anymore. And not one, but a lot of the fortunate things that have emerged out of this process, a significant component of it, would be to show all of our faults. We've never practiced politics, that's one. We don't have a strong diplomatic community, nor strong ministers. And Tim quite rightfully said, we have promoted mediocrity because if you look at the caliber of our ministers in themselves, it's very telling. We have not dealt with foreign policy, we have not dealt with security, we have not dealt with infrastructure, we have not dealt with the economy, and we most definitely have not dealt with food security. Right now, we have people who are starving in this country and we have no relief for them. How now are we in this position and a political party is holding on come hell or high water and we can't even feed the population? Mm-hmm. One of the credit of some of my indigenous brothers and sisters is that a lot of them have gone back into farming and they're in 3 months they could have a few crops. Yeah. See that. But we have not dealt with food security at a national level. We don't have an emergency response plan. All of these things have come to light through this electoral process. And we now have an opportunity to not only fix the governance of the country, but to fix all of these other issues.
And you said that things will be different in the next administration. And I guess most Guyanese would believe that the PPP would form the next administration. What's giving you confidence that things will be different, and what are those things that will be different?
Well, I think it would be idiotic of any administration to go in there and think that they could just operate a status quo. The fact that there has been this very issue right now in terms of politics has given the newer part is the kind of visibility that is needed. So any administration that decides that they want to go in there and operate ramsham and roughshod over the people, they will have to face the music in 5 years, 2025. Mm-hmm. And I will tell you, 2025 will be a very telling year, and it will be a good gauge as to how effective the government would have been in bringing this country back in line. You're talking about what has to be fixed. Pick anything from the list that I would have called out there. Yeah. I think all of those things and much more.
Yeah, and specifically, I think one of the biggest issues, we can fix agriculture and we can fix food security and everything else, but one of the big issues that's inhibiting Guyana, its development and growth and its ability to fulfill its promise to its citizen, is the trust that we have lost, especially over the last few years among the bigger parties and, of course, the Amerindian community also. But how do you see the PPP building bridges solid bridges into their non-traditional bases to ensure that there is a larger participation in the governance and the sharing of the resources, rather than just what we are seeing right now that APNU is doing?
I cannot speak on behalf of the People's Progressive Party. We're the Liberty and Justice Party, but what I can say, it has to be an inclusive approach. They cannot once again operate with status quo. It has not worked. It has brought us to this point. There needs to be greater involvement in the economy and in all sectors of all Guyanese, regardless of which ethnic group you belong to. Take, for example, the oil and gas sector. If you leave Georgetown, you go to Barbados, you go to Essequibo, and ask how many of them have been employed to go and work in the oil and gas sector, it's nil. If you go into the hinterland, even worse. So we have to find a way so that everyone participates in the economic drivers of Guyana. If we cannot do that, people will not feel empowered, and they will not feel like they want to be engaged in this, not only the political landscape, but they don't want to be engaged in Guyana in that sense.
And Timothy, same question to you. Do you believe things will be different in the next administration? And what are those things that will be different? And why would you want to believe that things would be different?
I certainly hope things will be different. I've spoken to Irfan Ali. This is assuming that the coalition are somehow removed from office in the next year. But assuming that the PPP get into office, I have spoken to Irfan Ali, and he has said all the right things. He has acknowledged that the system as it has been has not worked, and that there needs to be a greater level of transparency. Talk is cheap. And when you look at Guyana's history, what you find is that the party out of power talks about power sharing. The party in power conveniently forgets about constitutional reform and power sharing. Chedi Jagan in the 70s and 80s was a big power sharing man, but after 1992 he forgot about that. And he was the leader with the greatest integrity that I think Guyana's had. Hoyt sneered at power sharing in the 80s and in the 90s for as long as he thought he could get back into power. But by 1997, going into the end of his life, Hoyt was convinced power sharing was important because he was in opposition. For 23 years of PPP governance, there was no talk about power sharing. And as soon as APNU got in 2015, their whole election campaign about constitutional reform disappeared like dust, like smoke. Mm-hmm. And they enjoyed all the fruit of it, so that now they are so entrenched, they can't come out. They're hanging on by their fingernails. Power sharing is not going to be popular with the people in power. And that is where a third option is so important, because let me say this. We have two ethnically based parties. There are good people in both and there are bad people in both. There are competent people in both and there are hopeless racists in both parties. Let us be frank. But at the end of the day, the parties themselves are ethnically based. That is why in Beirut, you will have 200 people voting for one party and 3 people voting for the other. They're not voting policy, they're voting race. This is what we have. And until Guyanese recognize that the ethnic divide in our politics is as a result of PPP and APNU, we will continue to vote race, and our leaders will not be accountable to us, because they know that come hell or high water, nearly 50% will vote PPP and nearly 45% will vote APNU, and that small swing vote is all that matters. So they know. And that needs to change. To change Guyana, we have to say to the public, end political divisiveness, end the polarization, support a third party.
Yeah. Does the youthfulness of the PPP, and a lot more younger PPP leaders are taking the lead, and does their history in government and does their ability to to build better strategies? Does that give you the hope maybe that things can be better moving forward, both politically and economically?
Why do you say build better strategies? What have you seen?
No, I'm saying generally, I mean, we have seen no strategy over the past 5 years by the APNU government, but certainly during the PVP period, there were times when certain sectors were growing at significant rates, whereas the same industries under APNU were experiencing constant decline.
It goes back to my question. What strategies are you talking about?
Well, I'm just saying generally because they've had a history in government.
No, please don't be general, because you've credited one side with strategies and not the other. So I'm asking you, what strategies are you talking about?
Well, I'm saying, I'm referring specifically to when they were in power and certain sectors were experiencing growth, and those same sectors under APNU experienced decline. So I'm saying, does that give you
reference, Salim, no reference to a strategy yet? You were very specific. You credited one side with strategies and the other side without, and you still haven't given me a single strategy.
Well, I haven't given you the strategy that didn't work under this administration either. So, but I mean, in general terms, I'm asking you in terms, or maybe you don't see their strategy.
That's my exact point. But you see, it's time for us to stop talking about us and them, and to try to credit one with some kind of positive if we can't point to the positive. Do we want to talk about Skeldon as a strategy?
I'm not saying. I'm just
But you did, Salim. I'm sorry, you did.
I'm not saying that
is why I'm being specific about it. That is very specific. That one side had a strategy and the other side didn't, and that goes back to the lesser of two evils nonsense, which is what is dividing us. If you want to give a side credit, be specific so that it can be defended. But if you make generalizations like that, what you do is you lend to the lesser of two evils argument. You try to give plausibility to the fact that our two-party system, maybe there's one good party there. But even though I'm pressing you, and I ask you to forgive me for pressing you, you still haven't given me a policy. Let me put the shoe on the other foot. The APNU supporter will say crime is down. We're no longer a narco state. Crime is not down. That's not true. And we're still a narco state. But I will ask the APNU supporter, what policy has changed? What new untouchable group has come into the police force? What new system do they have that has created this wonderful change? And no one can point to it. So I'm saying we need to move away from these generalizations that betray our own internal prejudice, our own internal bias leaning one way. If you can't specifically say, this is what these people did, and I think it was a good thing, or that is what they did, and I think it is a bad thing, and we confine ourselves to generalizations without condescending to particulars, we are contributing to where we are now.
Good. Well, we are at program time right now. In fact, we passed. So I'll ask both of you to make any kind of final comments and what to expect over the next week and maybe after Wednesday. And I think one of the questions we had by one of our viewers was if GCOM at the end of next week, after the CCJ's ruling, were to come out with a declaration that's not in their favor, do you believe Granger will concede?
Tim, permit me, please. I will start off, Salim, to say thank you to you, to Nohar, and to Tim for permitting me to share my views. And to the viewers who have been watching, I want to thank you and just ask that you continue to be patient. I know the country has actually been very, very patient. We have not seen a massive amount of political crimes, if I were to put it that way, and that lends to the leadership within the political parties that are operating. I don't want to say party because there is not one specific, but all political parties. As I'm sure Tim has been telling his supporters, we've been saying the same thing, and all other parties have been saying the same thing. Let's maintain peace and calm in this quiet. correction in this process. I also want to urge your viewers and anyone who's listening, if you can't see, to let's not forget that COVID is still present. There is still 50% of the new cases in Maruka. We still have a surge in Region 7 and Region 9. So COVID has not left the shores of Guyana. So let's be good, responsible citizens, neighbors, and friends, and let's treat it like the virus it is. In terms of what to expect next week, we're expecting a result or a ruling that favors the Constitution, that favors law. I can't say that it is a matter of win or lose. Either way, Guyana will have to come out the winner because we would have attained clarity from the apex court of Guyana. If they are to make a ruling next week, I strongly believe that Mr. Granger would accept whatever ruling comes. He is committed to that on multiple occasions. I just hope that he sticks to his word. In my view, Mr. Granger is not the person to fear, even though he may seem to be the mastermind. But I think this is a case of where the tail is wagging the dog. We have seen Mr. Harman come out and say, concede to whom? Concede to what? We have not lost these elections. And the fact that Mr. Robbery Norton was not able to come on to this show tonight, it causes great suspicion in me that they are actually right now at a strategy meeting trying to figure out what is their next move, because they would have seen the arguments, they would have been guided, and they know that the ruling may not be one that they want next week. So now they have to find something else out of this Tesseract or Pandora's box that they could bring out to roll out for the Guyanese people. I am hopeful that when the ruling is handed down on Wednesday, that we have a peaceful process that points us straight to the declaration, to the second report. Remember, the first report was already delivered. To the second report that deals with the allocation of seats. I'm hopeful that we get to that point swiftly and that we get a swearing in of a new administration and we start getting down to getting our hands and feet dirty in trying to feng shui this country into something. And I will leave it there.
Well, thank you very much, Lenox. I really appreciate you being here and sharing your insights. Jonas, same question to you. Do you think after next week, and if there is a declaration by the end of next week by GCOM that Granger will concede?
Guyana's tired. Lenox is right. We have had a shutdown because of COVID, and we are not thinking about the small people. A lot of Guyanese live day to day. They sell on a road corner. They sell sweets, cigarettes, plants and chips, that kind of thing. Some of them sell food. And when the city closes, those people immediately lose their income. They don't think about next month or next 2 months. They're thinking about food for tomorrow, money for tomorrow. Those people have lost their wherewithal. As businesses have contracted, employees have been laid off. Those employees are not thinking about next month or next 2 months. They're thinking about food for tomorrow. We've seen a dramatic rise in small crime. Border market and stock market have become unsafe places. Pickpockets, robberies. It's a desperate situation. And the reality is nobody wants to steal. The things that people are going through now. You go to Pleasance Market, I spoke to a man there. He's laid off from Gaisuko. Had to plant a kitchen garden and he's selling callaloo and pak choy and that kind of thing to make ends meet, to feed a family. Things are hard without COVID. Now we've got COVID. Things are hard with a stable government. And now we have the two parties fighting in a 4-month fight because the loser will not come out of power. And nobody cares about these small people who are suffering. it is so bad that even the traditional charity organizations, people who normally will give to the churches and to the masjids to distribute, those sources are drying up. So the people who depend on the handouts from the church, not getting those handouts, and things are desperate. Guyana is tired. The people at the top don't care. And the people who try to give anonymously and quietly are finding that they can't do enough anymore. We need some kind of relief. Mm-hmm. And it is really time for us to get back on track and to fix where we are, because we could be so well off and we're not. We have suffered for 50 years and now we've suffered for 6 months. Something's got to change.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Timothy, for those words of advice to the Guyanese population and insight into what's happening on the ground. And again, viewers, thank you very much for staying up with us. It's been a long day for so many of us, including Timothy, with the case, and it's going to be a long night, and it's going to be a long week until next Wednesday. And the theme, of course, when will Guyana breathe again? We are all waiting on that moment for Guyana to breathe again and to fulfill its promise to its citizen of a happy, prosperous life for themselves and their family and their community. With that, I want to say thank you again to Globespan for offering us this platform, and Globespan and Nohar and his team. And we want to thank every one of you for tuning in and being part of this. I hope you shared the link with your friends so that they can learn a bit more about the unfolding saga in Guyana. With that, again, thank you very much. Good night, and God bless you all.
Thank you very much, Lenox.